What would you do if you walked into your own home and realized someone else had been raising your kids better than you? You ever have a moment where real life hits you harder than any bad news could? That's exactly how it started for Julian Mercer, a man everyone in San Diego, California seemed to admire from a distance. People saw the house on the hill, the shiny cars, the magazine features about how he built his fortune from nothing. What they didn't see was the guilt sitting on his shoulders as he unlocked his own front door after a long business trip. His hand shook a little, and not because he was tired. He knew exactly why. He had forgotten his daughter's birthday, not just any birthday, her 10th, a milestone, a day she had been talking about for months. He missed it because he was speaking at a conference, posing for photos, shaking hands with people he couldn't even name now. And as he stood in the entryway, suitcase still in his hand, he whispered to himself, "How could I let that happen?" His voice sounded small in his own home. The house should have been quiet. He expected it to feel heavy, maybe even cold. Instead, he heard soft giggles, a little bit of clapping, the faint sound of someone trying to sing while laughing at the same time. He frowned, confused. He took a few steps forward, his shoes brushing against the polished floor. Then he smelled it. Not expensive candles, not catered food, cake, homemade cake, with frosting that probably leaned to one side and crumbs stuck in the icing. He hadn't smelled that since before his company took off. Julian followed the sound into the dining room, bracing himself. What he found stopped him completely. His daughter, Tessa Mercer, sat at the table wearing a paper crown that was obviously cut out by hand. Beside her was her little brother, Colin, holding a sparkler candle that was only half lit. And standing right behind them was Angela Brooks, the woman who had worked in their home since Julian and his late wife first moved to California. She was smiling, clapping softly, leading a birthday song in a warm, steady voice. Tessa looked up and gasped, "Dad, you're home?" Julian swallowed, trying to find words, but something clogged his throat. Yeah, sweetheart. I came home early." Angela gave him a gentle nod. "We thought we'd still make today special," she said. "Didn't seem right to let it pass." Colin grinned like missing teeth made him braver. "We saved you a slice. The one with the most sprinkles." Julian stared at the table. The decorations were made from construction paper. The cake sat on a regular plate instead of the fancy glass stand. There were 3 mismatched candles. Nothing matched, nothing sparkled, nothing screamed wealth. But it felt real. He stepped closer, eyes stinging. "Tessa, I'm so sorry. I should have been here yesterday." She shrugged, but not carelessly, more like she didn't want him to feel worse. "It's okay. We can celebrate today. Right, Angela?" Angela rested a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Kids don't stop loving just because the calendar flips." Those words hit him harder than anything he'd heard in boardrooms or interviews. He sat down slowly, almost afraid the chair wouldn't hold him. Tessa leaned into his side. Colin pushed the plate toward him. Angela quietly stepped back, giving them space, but still staying close, like she always did. Julian looked at her differently in that moment, not as an employee, not as someone hired to help, but as the person who actually noticed when his children needed something, someone who filled in the gaps he pretended didn't exist. He cleared his throat and finally managed to speak. "Thank you, Angela. Really, I mean it." She shook her head softly. "Kids deserve to feel seen. That's all." Julian felt the words settle deep. The room felt warmer, fuller, alive. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like the richest man in the house. He felt like the one who had the most to learn. But what Julian didn't know was that this small celebration was only the first crack in the life he thought he had under control, and the truth waiting behind it would shake him far more than guilt ever could. Julian sat at the table longer than he planned, fork hovering over the slice of cake. The frosting leaned to the side just like he expected, and there were sprinkles in the shape of a heart that Colin proudly pointed out twice. Tessa rested her chin in her hands, staring at him like she was waiting for something deeper than words. He took a bite, and it tasted like childhood, like Saturday mornings before life got complicated. "You really came home early?" Tessa asked, her voice small but curious. Julian nodded. "I did. I wanted to see you." Angela raised an eyebrow, not unkindly. "Sometimes wanting has to be paired with showing, Mr. Mercer." He didn't flinch at the correction. He deserved it. He set the fork down and sighed. You're right. Colin swung his legs under the chair, energetic in the way 8-year-olds always are. You missed the magic trick I learned yesterday, but I can show you today. Julian smiled. I'd like that. Tessa looked at the candles again. We were going to wait to light the last one just in case you walked in. She hesitated. I hoped you would. Those words stung more than the guilt from the night before. Hope shouldn't have to feel like a gamble for a child. He cleared his throat and reached out, brushing a strand of her hair behind her ear the way he used to when she was little. She leaned into the touch and it nearly broke him. Angela gathered a few plates, moving quietly, letting them talk. Julian watched her for a moment. She moved through the home like she understood its heartbeat better than he did. She knew which cupboard stuck, which light switch flickered, which hallway made the floor creak. She knew more about his family than he did, and that thought twisted something inside his chest. Angela? He said softly. She paused. Yes? You didn't have to do all this. She gave him a look that was both gentle and firm. I didn't do it for you. That honesty hit him hard. She did it for the kids, for the memory of the woman who used to bake lopsided cakes before she got sick, for the family that had slowly slipped into separate rooms and separate lives. Julian looked at Tessa again. I don't want to miss anything else. I promise. Tessa didn't smile right away. She searched his face, reading him more carefully than a 10-year-old should. Can you stay home tonight? No calls? No meetings? He hesitated, just long enough for her eyes to drop. Angela spoke before he could answer. Kids remember what you choose, not what you say. Julian swallowed. Yes, I'll stay home. No calls. Colin cheered. Tessa let out a breath she'd been holding. Angela gave a small approving nod and carried the plates to the sink. For a moment, everything felt right. The sunlight through the window, the sound of kids whispering to each other, the soft clink of dishes. It felt like a second chance. But second chances usually come with something attached, and even though Julian didn't know it yet, something in the house had shifted long before he walked through the door. Angela turned off the faucet and dried her hands. There's something you should know, she said quietly. About yesterday. Julian frowned. What do you mean? Tessa and Colin stopped whispering. Angela looked at him, steady and serious. She cried herself to sleep waiting for you? Tessa's cheeks flushed. Colin looked down at his shoes. Julian felt the air leave his lungs. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Angela continued, softer now. Kids can forgive, but hearts bruise easy at their age. Julian stared at the table, the paper crown, the uneven cake, the candle that hadn't been lit yet. He felt shame, sadness, and something else he hadn't felt in a long time. Fear of losing the people who mattered more than the world ever could. But this wasn't the only truth Angela had been holding, and the next one would shake Julian far deeper than a forgotten birthday ever could. Julian leaned back in his chair, the weight of Angela's words pressing into him. Tessa picked at the edge of her paper crown, and Colin started stacking crumbs like tiny building blocks. The room felt different now, like the air had thickened. He tried to speak, but it was Angela who broke the silence first. She waited on the porch for you, Angela said softly. Said she heard a car that sounded like yours and didn't want to miss you walking up the steps. Tessa's voice trembled. I thought maybe you'd surprise me. Julian's heart dropped. Why didn't you call me? Tessa shrugged a little. I didn't want to bother you. That simple sentence cut deeper than anything. Kids should never feel like a burden in their own home. He rubbed his forehead, trying to steady himself. You could never bother me. Not ever. Angela watched him, not with judgment, but with the kind of honesty people rarely face. Sometimes you make it hard for them to believe that. Colin looked up suddenly. We tried to stay awake, but Angela said sleep was important. Julian turned to her. Thank you for staying with them. Angela shook her head. I stayed because they needed someone here. The house gets quiet when you're gone. He knew exactly what she meant. His wife's laughter used to fill the hallways, the kitchen, the backyard. After she passed, silence became the new sound of the house. He hid from it by working more, traveling more, filling calendars so he wouldn't have to feel the empty spaces. But his kids had to sit in it every day. Julian stood up and walked toward the living room, drawn by something he couldn't name. The others followed. The room felt familiar but different. The coffee table was covered with colorful markers, scraps of ribbon, and glitter that clung to everything. Tessa spoke up. We made decorations last night. Angela told us stories about Mom while we worked. Julian paused. Stories? Tessa nodded. About how she used to make birthday banners that were too long for the walls. Colin tried to make one like that, but it ripped. Colin puffed out his cheeks. Paper is way weaker than it looks. Julian laughed, but it came out strangled. He remembered those banners. He remembered stepping over them because they reached the floor. He remembered loving them, even when they looked messy. And he remembered the woman who made them. Angela crossed her arms gently. Kids shouldn't feel like memories are off limits. Julian swallowed. I didn't mean to shut that out. Tessa stepped closer. We miss her, but we want to remember her too. Julian crouched down so he was eye level with both kids. I miss her every day. I just didn't know how to talk about it without falling apart. Angela's voice softened. Falling apart in front of your kids isn't the worst thing. It tells them they're allowed to feel too. Julian stood again and walked toward the hallway where framed photos lined the wall. Some had dust. Some hung crooked. Some looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Tessa joined him, tracing a picture with her finger. I asked you once if we could move this one to my room, she said. You said not right now. He remembered. He had said that because he didn't want to see it every day. He didn't realize she did. You can take it, he said quietly. Any picture you want. Her eyes widened. Really? Yes, really. Angela started gathering the craft supplies. There's more you should know, Mr. Mercer, about yesterday morning. Julian turned slowly. What happened? Angela hesitated just for a breath. Tessa wanted to buy her own cake. She emptied her piggy bank into her backpack and planned to walk to the grocery store by herself. Julian felt dizzy. What? She could have been hurt. Anything could have... Tessa interrupted, embarrassed. I just wanted a cake. I didn't want Colin to feel sad that there wasn't one. Colin nodded. She told me to stay home, but I wanted to go too. Julian stared at both of them, horrified at the thought of his children walking alone near busy streets, past strangers, carrying coins and hope like armor. Angela continued gently. I stopped them before they got past the sidewalk, but the fact that they thought they needed to handle it on their own, that's what worried me. Julian took a slow breath, his hands trembling. He looked at his daughter, then his son, and then at Angela, who had been carrying more than groceries and laundry and schedules. She had been carrying the emotional safety of his children. But this wasn't the only moment he'd missed, and the next revelation waiting for him would force Julian to face something he'd been avoiding for years, something that would change the way he saw Angela, his kids, and himself forever. Julian sat down on the edge of the couch, his hands rubbing together like he needed friction to stay grounded. Tessa and Colin settled beside him, close enough to touch but waiting to see if he pulled away. Angela stood near the doorway, not hovering, but present enough to show she wasn't done speaking. Julian looked up at her, voice tight. What else happened yesterday? Angela took a slow breath. It wasn't just the cake. There was something at school, too. Tessa's shoulders tensed. Colin shifted uncomfortably. Julian's pulse picked up. School? Was there a problem? Tessa tried to speak first. It's not a big deal. Angela gently shook her head. It was a big deal to her. Julian turned to his daughter. Tell me. Tessa hesitated, eyes dropping to her lap. They asked everyone to bring a parent to the classroom for the birthday circle. I told my teacher you were coming, but you didn't. Julian closed his eyes for a moment, feeling that sentence like a blow. Sweetheart, I didn't know. Colin chimed in, trying to defend her. She sat by herself. I saw her when I walked past the door. Tessa's voice cracked a little. My teacher lit a candle anyway and said it still counted, but it didn't feel like it. Julian reached for her hand, but she didn't take it right away, not out of anger, out of caution. That hurt even more. I would have been there if I knew. Angela spoke softly. The school sent reminders, 3 of them. Julian looked up sharply. I didn't get anything. Angela held his gaze. They went to your assistant. She marked them as handled. Julian sat back, stunned. Somewhere between meetings, press releases, business flights, and hotel lobbies, even the reminders meant for him had been intercepted. His assistant had been trained to protect his schedule, and in doing so, she had filtered out the only moments that actually mattered. I didn't realize, he whispered. Tessa finally slipped her hand into his, and he held it gently, like it might break. "I didn't want to make you feel bad," she said. "I know you're busy." Julian shook his head slowly. "Busy doesn't matter if I'm missing you." Colin leaned against him, climbing halfway into his lap, like kids do when they forget they're growing. "Are you going to quit your job?" Julian let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "No, but I need to change how I'm doing things." Angela nodded slightly. "That's what they need to hear." Julian stood again and walked toward the hallway, like he needed to move to think. He reached the doorway of his late wife's old art room, now dusty, untouched. He ran his fingers along the frame. "I haven't been in here in years." Angela stepped closer, voice low. "They asked about the room last month." Julian turned. "Why?" Tessa spoke up. "We wanted to paint again, like we used to, but we didn't want to make you sad." Julian pushed the door open. The smell of old canvas and dried paint filled the air. Sunlight cut across the room, landing on jars of brushes still sitting in a glass cup. Nothing had moved since the funeral. Time had stopped there, because he needed it to. He stepped inside, slowly. "This room shouldn't be locked away," he said. His voice wavered. "She wouldn't have wanted that." Angela nodded. "Grief doesn't disappear just because you tuck it somewhere. Kids feel it too." Julian looked around. Photos, unfinished sketches, a jacket still hanging on the back of a chair. His chest tightened. He turned back to Angela. "How did you carry all of this without saying anything?" Angela's expression softened. "I tried to step in where I could, but I can't be their father." Tessa walked into the room and touched one of the brushes. "Can we open the windows tomorrow? It feels dusty." Julian smiled through tightening emotion. "Yes, we'll clean it together." Colin grinned. "Can I paint a dinosaur?" Julian laughed. "You can paint anything you want." Angela watched them, relief showing in her shoulders, but something else too, tiredness. A tiredness that came from holding someone else's family together longer than she should have had to. Julian walked back toward her. "I owe you more than thank you." Angela shook her head slowly. "You don't owe me. You just need to show up now." Those words settled into him like stones. Heavy, grounding, unavoidable. But Angela wasn't finished, and the next thing she was about to reveal wasn't about the kids at all. It was about something Julian had forgotten even existed, and it would force him to confront a truth he had buried far deeper than missed birthdays or unopened reminders. Julian leaned against the doorway, steadying himself as Angela's expression shifted. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't disappointment. It was the look of someone who had been holding something for too long and finally decided it could no longer stay hidden. He felt his stomach tighten. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Angela clasped her hands together. "There's something in the study you haven't looked at. It's been there for a long time." Julian frowned. "In the study? What do you mean?" Tessa and Colin looked between them, sensing the tension, even if they didn't understand it. Angela continued, "It's about your wife. Something she left behind before she passed." Julian blinked, his throat tightening. "That's not possible. She told me everything. We talked about all of it." Angela shook her head gently. "She didn't tell you this. She asked me to hold on to it until I felt the time was right." Julian stared at her, stunned. "Why you? Why not me?" Angela's voice softened. "Because she was afraid you'd bury yourself in work to avoid the pain. She thought the kids would need you more than ever, and she didn't want anything to pull you away from them." Julian took a slow breath. His chest felt heavy. "What did she leave?" Angela motioned toward the hallway. "Come with me. It's better if you see it." Tessa tugged his sleeve. "Can we come too?" Julian hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, you should." They walked together, footsteps quiet on the floor. The study door creaked when Julian opened it, like it hadn't moved in years. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk, awards lined the shelves, and his laptop sat where he'd left it 2 weeks earlier. Angela crossed the room and knelt beside a lower cabinet. "This drawer," she said. Julian crouched beside her and pulled it open. Inside was a small wooden box with his wife's initials carved into the top. He stared at it, breath catching in his chest. His hands shook as he lifted it out. "I haven't seen this in years," he whispered. Angela nodded. She finished it the week before she passed. Tessa looked up at him, eyes wide. "What is it?" Julian sat on the floor and opened the box. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Each envelope had a name written in familiar handwriting. One read, "For Tessa on her 10th birthday." Another read, "For Colin when he feels scared." Another, "For Julian when he forgets he's not alone." Julian covered his mouth with his hand. His eyes filled instantly. He couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. Tessa reached for the letter with her name on it, looking to him for permission. He nodded slowly, wiping his face. She opened it carefully, unfolding the paper like it might crumble. She read silently at first, then her voice trembled as she spoke aloud. "Sweet girl, if you're reading this, it means you've grown into someone even more beautiful than I imagined." Tessa stopped, tears spilling down her cheeks. Colin leaned against her, resting his head on her shoulder. Julian placed his arm around them both, pulling them close. Angela stood a few steps back, giving them space, her own eyes damp but steady. Julian whispered, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Angela answered softly, "Because you weren't ready to listen to anything that reminded you of her. Every time her name came up, you left the room or grabbed your phone or scheduled another trip. I didn't want the letters to become another thing you avoided." Julian nodded slowly, realizing she was right. He had spent so long trying not to feel hurt that he forgot feelings were the only thing connecting him to the people still here. Tessa wiped her face. "Mom wanted us to remember her, not hide her." Julian hugged her tighter. "I know, and I'm sorry I made it harder." Colin looked at the remaining envelopes. "Can we read more later?" Julian nodded. "We'll read them together, all of them, when you want to." Angela exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for months. "There's something else, too. Something she told me to tell you when the time came." Julian looked up, eyes red. "What is it?" Angela met his gaze. "She didn't want you to raise them alone." Julian blinked. "I haven't." Angela shook her head gently. "Not in the physical sense, in the emotional sense. She wanted you to let someone help you, not just with chores, with the heart part." Julian understood, too clearly. He had kept everyone at a distance so he wouldn't risk breaking again. He whispered, "I don't know how." Angela replied, "Then start by learning. They'll teach you. Kids always do." Julian looked at his children, one wiping her cheeks, one leaning against him, trusting without hesitation, and something inside him shifted. Not suddenly, not magically, but genuinely. But even with the letters opened and the truth finally spoken, there was still one more confrontation waiting. One that would force Julian to face the damage his absence had caused and decide whether he was willing to fight for the family he thought he'd never lose. Julian stayed on the floor for a while, the letters still resting in the open box. Tessa leaned against him, and Colin sat cross-legged nearby, tracing the wood grain with his finger. The room felt heavier but also clearer somehow, like a window had finally been opened after years of stale air. Angela stood quietly, but Julian could tell she still had more on her mind. He finally spoke. "There's something you're not saying." Angela nodded once. "There is, and it's about the kids' behavior the past few months." Julian's brow furrowed. "Behavior? I thought everything was fine." Tessa shifted uncomfortably. Colin pulled his knees to his chest. Angela took a slow breath. "Tessa's teacher called twice," she said. "She's been keeping to herself, not talking much, sitting alone during lunch." Julian turned to his daughter. "Is that true?" Tessa shrugged a little. "It's easier that way. When people ask about birthdays or holidays or family nights, I don't know what to say." Julian felt the words land like stones. "You could have told me." She looked at him with a mixture of honesty and hesitation. "You always looked busy, or tired, or somewhere else in your head." He didn't defend himself this time. He didn't try to explain. He simply nodded. Angela continued, "And Colin has been getting into trouble." Colin's eyes widened. "Not bad trouble." Angela gave him a soft look. "Not bad, just attention-seeking trouble." Julian turned to his son. "What kind?" Colin fidgeted. "I told jokes during class, and I hid someone's pencil case, and I climbed the fence at recess." Julian tried not to smile. "Why, buddy?" Colin shrugged. "People notice you more when you do things. I wanted someone to look at me." Julian felt that one sharply. He reached for his son and pulled him into his side. "You don't need to do anything wild for someone to see you. I should have been paying more attention." Colin leaned against him, small and warm and trusting. "Are you going to come to school stuff now?" Julian nodded. Yes, I am. Angela stepped closer. There's another part, and it's about me. Julian looked up. What about you? She hesitated for the first time all day. I was offered another job, at a family who's home more, who's present, who doesn't need someone to fill in the emotional gaps. The words hit harder than he expected. Tessa gasped. You're not leaving, are you? Angela looked at her gently. I haven't decided yet. Colin grabbed her hand. You can't go. You're like part of us. Angela squeezed his fingers. I care about you very much. That's why this is hard. Julian stood slowly, facing her fully. Why didn't you tell me? Angela met his eyes. Because I didn't want to feel like I was abandoning the kids, but I also can't be the only one holding their feelings together. Julian understood, deeply. He rubbed the back of his neck. Have I made you feel like you had to carry everything? Angela nodded. Yes, and I'm tired, Mr. Mercer, not because of chores, because of emotion, because I've been the one they cry to, the one they ask questions to, the one who explains why their father is gone again. Julian closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were glassy but steady. I don't want you to leave, but I don't want you to stay for the wrong reasons either. Tessa spoke up, voice cracking. We need you. Angela brushed a tear from the girl's cheek. You need him more, and it seems like he's finally trying. Julian nodded slowly. I am. I can't change the past, but I can fix the way I show up now. Angela studied him, searching his face for something real. Words won't do it. Actions will. Julian stepped forward. Then let me prove it. Not just today, not just this week. Really prove it. Angela held his gaze, then exhaled softly. I'll stay for now, but I need to see change for their sake. Tessa hugged her tightly. Colin wrapped his arms around both of them. Julian watched, knowing that love could look like a hug or a letter or a birthday song, but it could also look like accountability. He finally spoke. Tomorrow we start fresh, all of us. Angela nodded. Tomorrow can be different if you make it different. Julian glanced at the letters again, the one with his name still untouched. I'll read mine tonight, alone, and then I'll be better tomorrow. Angela placed a hand on the doorframe. Just remember, tomorrow only counts if it arrives. But tomorrow wasn't the only turning point ahead, because before the night ended, Julian would face someone who had enabled his absence without him realizing it, and that confrontation would determine whether the promises he made would actually matter. Julian walked into the kitchen after the kids went upstairs, his mind racing. The letters, the stories, the missed moments, all of it swirled together. He poured a glass of water, but his hands still shook. Angela stayed nearby, wiping the counter even though it was already clean. She could tell he wasn't finished thinking. I need to make a call, Julian finally said. Angela looked at him knowingly. To your assistant, he nodded. If she filtered school messages, birthday notices, reminders, I need to know why. Angela dried her hands. Make sure you ask the right question. Julian frowned. Which is? Did she hide things because you asked her to, or because she thought you couldn't handle them? That hit him harder than he expected. He stepped into his office and closed the door halfway, leaving it open enough to show he wasn't hiding. He tapped the speaker button and waited. After 2 rings, a voice answered. Mr. Mercer, welcome back. Do you need me to schedule? Julian cut her off. I need to talk about the school messages you marked as handled. There was a pause. Of course. I didn't want to overwhelm your calendar. You had press interviews and... Julian's tone sharpened. That wasn't your choice to make. Another pause. Longer this time. I thought I was helping. Julian glanced toward the open doorway, seeing the edge of the hallway where Tessa and Colin sometimes listened in on conversations they didn't understand. Helping would have been letting me know my daughter wanted me at school. Helping would have been sending reminders through. His assistant exhaled. With respect, sir, every time something personal came through, you told me to filter it out. You said focus on business first. Julian felt that one. Hard, he remembered. He had said it during a frantic month, thinking he was protecting himself from emotional overload. He didn't know the cost. He spoke quietly. Things have changed. Starting now, I want every message that has to do with my kids sent directly to me. No exceptions. His assistant sounded uncertain. Even if it conflicts with your meetings? Julian didn't hesitate, especially then. Another pause, then, understood. He ended the call and leaned back in his chair. Angela appeared at the doorway, leaning lightly against the frame. "How did it go?" she asked. Julian ran a hand through his hair. "She said she thought she was helping, but she was only doing what I told her to do a long time ago." Angela nodded. Sometimes the damage comes from old instructions no one revisits. Julian let out a long breath. "I don't want to be that kind of father anymore." Angela walked into the room and sat across from him. "Then surround yourself with people who remind you of what matters, not people who protect you from it." Julian looked at her seriously. "That includes you." She shook her head gently. "I can guide, but you have to carry your own family." He nodded. "I will, starting now." There was a knock on the office wall, small, hesitant. Tessa peeked around the corner. "Dad, can we sleep in the living room tonight? All of us? Like a camp out?" Julian smiled softly. Yeah, we can do that." Colin popped into view behind her. "Can we make popcorn?" Julian stood and motioned them closer. "Yes, popcorn, blankets, pillows, the whole thing." They ran off excitedly. Angela stood too, smiling just a little. "They've been waiting for you to say yes to something like that for a long time." Julian looked toward the hallway where the kids disappeared. "Then it won't be the last time." Angela picked up a folded blanket from a chair. "I'll help set up, but after that, you take the lead." Julian nodded, humbled. "I get it." Angela paused before leaving the room. "One more thing." He looked up. "What?" "You should read the letter with your name on it. Not to punish yourself, to understand what she saw in you." Julian swallowed. "I'm scared to." Angela's expression softened. "Being scared doesn't mean you shouldn't do it." He nodded slowly. "I'll read it after they fall asleep." Angela gave a small approving nod and stepped out of the room. Julian followed her into the living room where Tessa and Colin were piling blankets into a nest-shaped mountain. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel quiet. It felt alive. But the letter waiting upstairs would bring a truth Julian didn't expect, and what he read inside would determine whether his promise to change would last a night or a lifetime. The living room slowly quieted as the night settled in. Popcorn bowls were half finished. The movie paused barely 10 minutes in because Colin kept asking questions and Tessa kept pointing out things she remembered from watching it with their mom years before. Eventually, the kids fell asleep. Tessa curled against Julian's arm. Colin sprawled across a pile of pillows. Angela draped a blanket over them and whispered, "I'll head home. Call if you need anything." Julian nodded. "Thank you for everything today." She gave a small smile and let herself out, leaving the house in a rare kind of calm. Julian carefully slid out from under the blanket and stood there for a moment, watching his children breathe. Their faces looked peaceful, safe, trusting. It made something tighten in his chest, but not painfully, more like a reminder of what mattered. He walked upstairs, each step weighted with anticipation. The wooden box still sat where he left it in the study. He picked up the envelope with his name written in his wife's handwriting, the loops, the slant, the familiar way she dotted the I. His hands trembled as he opened it. He unfolded the letter and started reading. "If you're holding this, it means life moved faster than our plans." Julian sat down, eyes fixed on the page. "I know you think strength means keeping everything together, but real strength means letting the people you love see you break and trusting them to stay." His breath caught. "You will try to disappear into work because it's the only place where you feel like you can control the outcome. But our children don't need a provider. They need a father who laughs, who listens, who takes pictures even when his hands are shaking." Julian's eyes blurred, and he blinked hard. "You won't know how to do it at first. You'll doubt yourself. But keep trying. They will forgive every clumsy attempt as long as they feel you're really there." He pressed the paper to his forehead, fighting a wave of emotion. "And one more thing. Don't shut Angela out. She has more patience than both of us combined, but don't lean on her instead of showing up. She's there to help, not to replace you." Julian exhaled shakily, feeling both exposed and guided. "You are not alone even when it feels like it. Love them loudly. Love yourself gently." The letter ended with his wife's name, written the way she always signed birthday cards. Julian sat quietly for a long time, the house still except for the muffled sound of his children shifting in their sleep downstairs. He finally stood, folded the letter, and held it to his chest. Then he went back to the living room, lay down beside his kids, and pulled the blanket over all three of them. Tessa turned slightly and whispered in her sleep, "Dad?" Julian whispered back, "I'm here." And for the first time in far too long, he meant it. The next morning would bring questions, schedules, new habits, awkward attempts, and slow healing, but it would be real, and real was enough to build a life again. And that's the lesson tucked into this story. The people who love you don't need perfection. They need presence. They need effort. They need you to show up before it's too late. If you're watching this and someone came to mind, call them, hug them, apologize, or show up. Don't wait for a wake-up call.